Well, and here we go. Hello, night crawlers and sand dollars and all kinds of other folk. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're in. Good evening, if you're somewhere I haven't figured out yet. Wherever you might be, I am here and you are there, and we are all together. Sounds like that should be followed up by Goo Goo Gajoob or something. But anyway, what is going to be following it up is we're going to be doing a little reading. So actually, we're getting quite close to the end of the book. Where if we don't finish tonight, I expect we will finish tomorrow or soon thereafter, because we're really down to the last few pages of the first Shadowmarch book. But anyway, so what else do I have to talk about that I wanted to share with you guys? Not really much of anything. Just saw a beautiful sphinx moth on our deck outside of the bedroom, which is because I left the light on and must have attracted it. But anyway, that's good news because we hadn't seen any sphinx moths yet this year, and they're beautiful. They're gorgeous things. Excuse me, very large, usually with a wingspan about like that, and beautiful stripy backs, variety of different colors though, so there's not just one kind of sphinx moth. And in fact, they come from at least two different sources, the two different kinds of sphinx moths that I know of, depending on what crop that their caterpillar stage feeds on. I think they're like tomato sphinx moths and potato sphinx moths and gosh knows what else. Turnip sphinx moths, perhaps. Rutabaga sphinx moths. But anyway, they're particularly nice. We like them. They're big old things. They're like hummingbirds at night when you go outside because their wings move so fast that they actually hover in a way that moths don't usually do. So anyway, it was great pleasure to see that. I took a few pictures and sent them to Deb because she's asleep. But like me, she's a big moth fan. And, you know, that's one of the things that we do because we're weird and old is we like to see all the different critters that live on our property, whether they are bugs or birds or bears. Well, we don't have any bears. At least I haven't seen any bears. I don't think we have bears here. If we did, they would be wildly out of place and would have wandered in from far, far, far away or escaped. Perhaps took a wrong turn after stealing a car and heading for Vegas. So no bears, but we do have all kinds of other critters. We have, I think I've told you about the rabbits. Deb and I have a long-running rabbit feud because Deborah is a gardener, and Deborah has put a great deal of time and energy into our yard. The yard is the sort of area around the house. The property itself actually goes on, and most of it's not technically wild because it's a hillside, not suburban, but a rural neighborhood. So there are lots of houses and there's roads and things like that. So I wouldn't call it, wild. But in terms of the property around our house, we haven't done anything except right around our house. So the hillside and all that other stuff. The arroyo, there's a good Spanish word. All of that is pretty much wild. So we get a lot of critters that find their way onto the property. We've had coyotes and bobcats. And of course, we get tons of smaller animals, skunks and rabbits and raccoons and all kinds of things. And lots of interesting birds. We have some lovely owls. We've identified 3 different kinds of owls, horned owls, barn owls, which make a really freaky noise. If you haven't been around barn owls, now I'm sure many of you have, but if you haven't been around barn owls, they make this noise in the middle of the night. That is quite spooky if you've never heard it before. It really is weird sounding. And then we have what's called a western screech owl. I don't know how I got off on, oh yeah, sphinx moth. So anyway, so that was my big thing for the night, was finding and being able to photograph a sphinx moth to share with Deb. What else? What else to talk about? Just the usual, working on the books. Working on the books. Practicing for my parents' anniversary, which we'll be doing again tomorrow. And I think that's about it. I don't really have time to do much else except work on the books at the moment. And that's going to be true for the next several months, because I basically have 2 books that have to be turned in before February, and one of them is mostly written and the other is not mostly written. So it's going to be a bit of a struggle getting all that stuff done. But anyway, anything else to tell? Nah, I can't really think of anything. We're just, we're living our life here. We're all of us in different. The kids have started back. I say kids, they're all in their 20s now. So the young people have started back to college. So that's going on, and we're riding out the continuing pandemic, the Delta variant, and whatever the hell else is going on, and just pretty much like everybody else. So that's my story. Now I'm going to check in and see who has dropped by to say hello, and then we will get to reading. So Olaf, my friend, my good friend, good to see you. Kristen, hello, how are you? Chris, good to see you too. Mark, checking in from West Yorkshire. Morning, good to see you. Suzanne, after a long absence. Yes, lovely to see you. And from West Yorkshire as well. So this is, I guess I'm kind of like an infectious disease vector. You get people in little clusters that are a tad infected. There's obviously a little pocket of ill health in West Yorkshire. There seems to be one in Berlin. I don't know what causes it, but I'm not in a hurry to cure it, whatever it is. So good to see you. Speaking of the Berlin hypercluster, there's Petra. Good morning, Petra. Lovely to see you. Rosalba, a pleasure. And Mark says he's in Huddersfield. I see. He's communicating with Suzanne as to where in West Yorkshire. And Suzanne says she's in Otley. And Carol is checking in from Chester. Hello, I've been to Chester. I have been to Chester. It's been a while, though. So, Wouter, hello, good to see you. Jessica, hello, good to see you in Germany. And Wouter, say hello to Iris for me as well. James D. Scott, g'day. G'day, good to see you. I will toss another toddler on the Barbie, and we will party on. We will party like it's 1999. Never mind. It's just going to be another one of my, oh my God, we're all so old. Anyway, Jessica, listening from the kitchen while preparing dessert. Ooh, dessert is one of my favorite things in the whole world, so I'm glad to hear that. Dessert is a good thing. Dessert is one of the great good things in life, because technically you don't need dessert to live, at least in a scientific sense. But life would be so much poorer without it. So it's one of those things that is just pure good, I mean, it doesn't serve an essential purpose in the sense of it doesn't keep you from dying. People could live their entire lives eating other things and never having dessert. It's not super hard because almost anything can be dessert. It's just a good thing. I don't know, it just makes me feel good. So anyway, glad that's what you're doing. Hope it goes well. Anthony. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm glad I said Anthony then. I probably said Anthony in the past, but I know in the UK it's usually Anthony. But anyway, so good to see you, Anthony. Petra is talking about all the critters in her property. Owls, yeah, the owls are very good. We have at least a pair of horned owls who are the ones who do the whoo 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 noises, and then we have a bunch of barn owls, and the screech owls make kind of a weird noise too. But I can't imitate it right now because I would wind up spraying that on the screen. It's a very weird noise they make. Anyway, Wouter, kestrel, prey, and they hang in the air. Oh no, there's another term for that in English. Before they stoop, when they come down, it's called stoop. I think they bait. I can't remember. Anyway, somebody will tell me. So Yara, good to see you. And Anthony says he's checking in from St. Magwan, or Magwan, I'll say, since it's the UK. I'm not quite a few other TAD fans in West Yorkshire. See, there's something about these geographical nexi, if that's the plural of nexus. And Yara is checking in from Japan, so excellent. Julian, hello, good to see you. Who else have we got? Christine, hello, good to see you too. So, many people have checked in. As I said, I'm going to read. We are getting close to the end of the book, and in fact, where we stopped last time was in kind of mid-scene, because there was a lot of stuff happening, and I didn't want to rush partway any further through it. But basically what's going on is that Chavin has returned from a mysterious errand. Chavin is the castle physician, who also seems to know several things about many aspects of what's going on, at least enough that he's beginning to put some facts together as to what might be going on. So he's reappeared. He's grabbed Bryony, who is on her way to check in with her stepmother, Anissa, who's not hugely older than Bryony, but she's also pregnant. And they have found Anissa and her maid, Celia, in the tower. I think it's the Tower of Spring. It's been years since I've read this, so I'm not 100% certain about any of this stuff anymore. I can't tell. Yes, Tower of Spring. Okay. So anyway, so what, as they have come in to see that, it's turned out that Chavin has a completely different agenda than Bryony's much more domestic agenda. Meanwhile, of course, there is a war against the fairy folk going on outside the gates, although the people in the castle don't really know it yet. So anyway, so that's what's going on, and Chavin has showed up, and he has confronted Anissa with a strange stone called a kulikos, or kulikos, I think is how I was pronouncing it, a kulikos stone, and that is what they've all got all worked up about. So I'm going to start reading with Chavin here. It is certainly much like madness to believe such a thing, Highness, Chavin agreed. He seemed very calm for a lunatic. That is why I think you should hear all my tale before you try to understand. You see, I knew I could not make anyone believe a tale like that. I did not really believe it myself, but I was frightened and intrigued by what I had learned about kulikos stones. I decided I must know more. I went in search of knowledge and eventually found it, although the price was high. He paused and wiped at his forehead with his tattered sleeve. Very high. But what I learned is that in the south of Ion, they believe that kulikos stone summons a terrible spirit. So powerful is this ancient art, sorcery, so dreadful, that in many places even possessing one of these stones will earn the bearer death on the instant. Listening to such words by flickering candlelight, Bryony felt as though she were in some story, not a tale of heroism and heavenly reward like the one Puzzle had just sung at the feast, but something far older and grimmer.
Why do you say all this foolishness to my mistress when she is not well? Demanded Celia in a shrill voice. Even if someone has done some bad thing and then run past the tower where she lives, what is that to us? Why do you say that to her?
The guards standing by the door were murmuring to each other now, confused and a little fearful. Bryony knew she couldn't let it all go on much longer.
State your case, Chavin, she ordered.
Very well, he said.
I have learned that there is something interesting about the murderous Kulikos spirit. It is female, always female. When it is summoned, it will only inhabit the bodies of women. Madness, cried Anissa. And it is particularly a favorite weapon among the witches of Zand and of the southernmost lands of Ion, lands like Devonis. Devonis, I say parenthetically, is where Anissa is from originally. Anissa turned to her stepdaughter, holding out her hands. Bryony couldn't help shrinking back just a little. Why do you let him say this to me, Bryony? Have I not always been kind to you? Because I am from Devonis, I am a witch. It is easy enough to discover, Chavin said loudly. He thrust the small gray object closer to the king's wife. Here is the stone. Look at it. It was tossed aside by the one who employed it to murder the Prince Regent after she had used it up. But doubtless a little of those dark magics still remain. Touch it, my lady, and if you have anything to hide, the stone will show that. He extended his hand, bringing the stone close to her bare arm. Anissa tried to squirm away from it as though it were a hot coal, but couldn't disentangle herself from the protective embrace of her maid, Celia. No! Celia snatched the milky gray stone out of Chavin's hand so quickly that as he closed his fingers on nothingness, the girl had already pulled it against her own breast. He stared in surprise. There is no need for this, the maid declared, then snapped out something in a language Bryony did not recognize. A short, sharp cry, like a hawk falling on its prey. Bryony tried to say something, to curse the young woman for interfering, but a change in the air of the room suddenly made it hard to talk. A cold filling and tightening of her ears as though she had dunked her head into the water. There is no need for this or for anything else. Celia's voice suddenly seemed to come from a great distance. I did not drop the stone away as a man drops away a maid when she is a maid no longer. I was weary, and it fell from me, and when I was strong enough again to go back and search for it, it was gone. The girl's voice rose, ending on a triumphant cry, harsh but still muted by the strange squeezing of the air. No one lets drop a Kulikos stone, little man, not by a choice. Celia lifted her hand and put the stone in her mouth. Her face abruptly blurred and changed, her torchlit skin seeming to shrink away, even as something darker unfolded from inside. This devouring of light by darkness spread over her in the matter of a few heartbeats, as though someone had tossed a rock into a stream in which the girl was reflected, muddying the surface. The strangling air of the chamber finally began to move, but instead of bringing relief, it sped faster and faster. A breeze that became a harsh wind, then a full gale, swirling so swiftly that Bryony could feel needle-sharp bits of dust and flecks of stone stinging her skin. The guards shouted in surprise and terror, but she could hear them only faintly. The candles blew out. Now only the fire gave light, and even the flames were bending toward the dark shape growing before the bed, the shape that had been the pretty maid Celia. Anissa screamed, a thin, thread-like sound. Bryony tried to call to Chavin, but something had knocked the little man to the floor, where he lay, limply motionless, perhaps even dead. The room was filling with the mingled smells of hot metal and mud and blood, but blood most of all, powerful, heavy, and sour. Strangely, Bryony could still see something of Anissa's made in the horror, a thickness at its core that echoed her shape, a gleam of her features in the dark, crude mask, but mostly it was a blur of growth, an inconstant, shadowy thing, armored like a crab or spider, but far more irregular and unnatural. Jagged-edged plates and lengthening spikes of powdered stone and other hard things grew and solidified even as Bryony gaped in astonishment, as if it built itself out of the very dust whirled through the chamber by the rushing air. A glint of eyes from deep in the dark instability of the face. Then the thing lifted an impossibly long hand. Scythe-like claws clacked and rasped against each other as it advanced on Bryony. She stumbled back, almost boneless with fear, knowing now beyond doubt what had killed her brother Kendrick. She was weaponless, wearing an impossible, ridiculous dress. She was doomed. Bryony grabbed up a heavy candle holder and swung it, but one of the thing's clawed hands swept it from her grasp with a ringing clash. Something rushed past her. A long pole crashed into the thing's stomach, and for a moment it was driven back. "Run, Highness!" screamed the young guardsman Millward, trying to keep the thing pinioned on the end of his halberd like a boar. "Lou, help me!" His fellow soldier was slow to come forward. By the time he did take a few timid steps into the blinding storm of grit, the thing had shattered Millward's halberd like a stick of sugar candy and was free again. It closed with the second guard and dodged his swinging pike. Instead of running, Bryony stared, transfixed. Why didn't the guards draw their swords? Who could be fool enough to fight with such long weapons in a small room? The apparition ripped at the second guard's midsection with a dull flash of talons, and he fell back, clutching at his shredded armor, gouting blood black as tar. The thing now slouched between Bryony and the door. Her moment of indecision had left her trapped. She thought she saw something moving behind the monstrous shape. Was it Chavin, escaping? The young guard Millward had finally drawn his sword. He swiped at the thing, but it gave no ground, only let out a rumbling hiss, a sound more like stone scraping on stone than the breath of a living animal, and sank back on itself. Its shadowy form became darker and thicker. For a heartbeat, Bryony thought she could see the maid Celia's face in it, triumphant and deranged, lips curled back in a silent scream of joy. The young guardsman leaped forward, shouting with terror even as he hacked at the shapeless thing. For a moment it seemed he might even be hurting it. The monstrosity had shrunk to almost human proportions, and the claws spread like pleading hands, the dark face all moaning, toothless mouth. Then the talons darted out, almost too quickly to be seen, and Heron Millward sagged and collapsed backward, blood bubbling from the hole of his eye socket, his face a red ruin. Bryony could barely breathe, her heart squeezed in her chest by terror until it was near to bursting. The Kulikos demon moved toward her, edges shifting, nothing quite clear except the gleam of its eyes and the clicking of the long curved claws as they opened and closed, opened and closed. She stumbled and slid to the floor. fumbling desperately for a stool, anything to keep those terrible knives at bay. Her hand closed on something, but it was only the butt of dead Millward's halberd, a length of splintered wood. She held it in front of her, knowing it would be no more use than a broom straw against that strength and those terrible hooked talons. Then a blossom of flame rose in the air behind the thing, haloing it for a moment so that it seemed to have taken on a new aspect. No longer a dark, muddy nightmare, but a fire demon from the pits of Kernios' deepest realm. The fire crashed onto its murky head and shoulders in a shower of sparks and tumbling ribbons of flame. The creature let out a rasping howl of surprise that made Bryony's insides quiver, as though they had been completely turned to liquid. It turned to lash out at Chavin, who jumped back, dropping the iron fire basket from his smoking, blackened hands, and somehow avoided being torn in half by the sweep of the talons. Flames leaped on the thing's body and crowned its shapeless head, burning higher and higher until they licked at the ceiling. Stumbling backward, it pulled the curtains from the bed, tangling itself like a bear in a net. The diaphanous cloth sparked and swirled, and now the flames were bound to it. The shadow shape writhed, flapping its clawed hands, and Celia's face came into view again, this time twisted in a grimace of alarm. It tore at the flaming curtains, and they began to fall away. In a moment it would be free again. Cold fury sent Bryony forward with both hands wrapped around the broken halberd staff, which she drove as hard as she could into the center of the terrible thing. It was like running into a stone column. Bryony flew back from the impact, dazzled, dizzied, but the ragged hole of the thing's mouth popped open, and something flew out and clattered across the stone floor. The Kulikos beast howled again, this time in true pain and terror, but the air was suddenly full of sparks and flying dust. The wind that had swirled it into being now seemed to be pulling it apart. Bryony tried to get up, but the beast's grating screech, so loud that it threatened to shake loose the roof timbers, made her stumble and fall again, and so the retaliatory sweep of claws missed her, and she lived. The thing that had been Celia threw itself to the floor, moaning as it scrabbled after the lost Kulikos stone. The crawling shape was wreathed in flame, but at its core, the human and demon essences were in confusion now, flickering and rippling in smoke. It lurched up, hissing triumphantly, but the thing clutched in its taloned hand was only a thimble, perhaps one that had belonged to the maid herself. The shape dropped the silvery thing and took a lurching step backward with a bellow of pain and despair, the Celia face now a visible mask of agony. Bryony's broken pike staff shuddered in its chest, the wound a fiery hole. It stumbled back against the bed, and the entire canopy finally pulled loose and fell atop it, a blanket of roaring fire. The shadow shape roared and thrashed as the fire leaped upward. Then, with a mewling noise that for the first time had something human in it, fell forward and lay stretched on the floor, twitching in the flames. In the sudden stillness, Bryony felt as though she had been carried away to the moon, to some country from which she could never return to the life she knew. She stared at the thing wrapped in burning curtains, and the fire, now smoldering in the carpets. When she was certain it had stopped moving, she picked up a chamber pot and emptied it over the burning shape, dousing the worst of the fire and adding the stench of boiling urine to the dreadful odor of fire and blood. As she listlessly began to stamp out the rest of the flames, Chavin crawled toward her, his hands blackened, his face stretched in a rictus of pain. "Don't," he said hoarsely. "We shall have no light." As absently as if someone else inhabited her body. Bryony found a candle and lit it from a bit of flaming bed curtain, then finished the job of putting out the fires. She lit another candle. She was not crying, but she felt as though she should have been. Why? Chavin shook his head. I was a fool. Because she was ill before Kendrick died and ill afterward. I thought the maid truly had the fever that had struck Barrack. I see now she was only preparing the ground before time for the weakness that would overcome her after using the Kulikos. I thought the witch must be Anissa, and I tried to bluff her. I did not guess the stone could work again without much preparation, some kind of intricate charm. No. Why did she kill Kendrick? Was she going to kill me as well? Chavin stared down at the sodden, scorched mass. He peeled back a corner of the curtain. Bryony was startled to see Celia's ordinary dead face, eyes open, mouth gaping. Whatever spell had gripped the girl had now passed, leaving nothing behind to show what she had been except a smeared residue of grit, dust, and ash on her skin, clotted into a foul mud. Yes, she would have killed you, perhaps by poison, and Barrack too, if he had been with you. Your stepmother did not invite you here. Celia herself did. That is why Anissa seemed so confused. Why did she do it? For whom, I think, is the better question, and I have no answer. He examined his black, blistered hands and said ruefully, I was so certain it could only be Anissa. He looked at Bryony, and she stared back, both struck with the same thought. Anissa, she said. Bryony's stepmother was curled on the floor on the far side of the bed, in a puddle of water, seemingly oblivious to anything that had happened. The queen was half delirious with pain, her hands clutching at her belly. It is coming, she moaned. The child, it hurts. Oh, Madi Surazim, save me. Get help, Chavin told Bryony. I am nearly useless with these burns. Send for the midwife. Quickly. She hesitated for a moment. Anissa's wide-eyed look of terror made her feel ill. She remembered her stepmother's fear as Chavin had all but accused her of murdering her stepson, and the feverish feeling grew worse. The loud mouse, she and Barrack had called their father's young wife, teasing, resentful. She would never call this woman names again. Bryony staggered out into the deserted tower with one of the candles, made her way down the stairs, and somehow did not fall. At the bottom, she forced open the door and found the two guards waiting there. They looked her up and down, amazed. She could only guess what she looked like, smeared in ash and blood and worse, but the guards certainly seemed terrified. There was no time to coddle them or make up stories. By all the gods, are you both deaf? Did you hear none of that happening inside? People are dead. The queen is about to give birth. One of you go upstairs and help Chavin, the other run to find the midwife, Isolde. I don't know where she's gone. Anissa's maid probably sent her away. She and the other women went to the kitchen, said one of the goggle-eyed guards. Then go, curse you, go quickly. Fetch her. He ran off. The other, still looking at her as though Bryony was the most frightening sight of his short life, turned and dashed up the stairs into the tower. I won't be the worst thing he's seen for very long. She stood trembling beneath the naked stars, trying to catch her breath. The sound of people singing floated to her across the empty courtyard. Winter's Eve, she remembered, but now it seemed unutterably strange. Everything before the Tower of Spring seemed to have happened in another century. I just want to sleep, she thought. Sleep and forget. Forget that moment when that dark thing had grown out of dust and air and vile magics. When her old life of certainty, frail as it was, had vanished forever. Forget her stepmother twitching in pain and fear. We've betrayed them all by our foolishness, she thought. Father, Kendrick, Anissa, all of them. Shazo. She felt a dreadful stab of shame. Shazo, chained and suffering. She hesitated for a moment. She was so tired, so very tired, but pushed herself away from the wall on which she had been leaning, away from the stones that to her exhausted muscles felt soft and inviting as a bed, and set out, limping toward the stronghold. One wrong would be put right before the dawn of Orphan's Day, in any case. Zoria, merciful Zoria, she begged, if you ever loved me, give me a little more strength. As Bryony left the courtyard and entered the colonnade, she thought she heard footsteps behind her. But when she turned, there was no one there, the stone path empty in the moonlight. She hobbled on toward the stronghold and the shackled ghost of her own failure. Well, looks like we may actually finish this tonight. Chapter 40, Zoria's Flight. Heart of a Queen. Nothing grows from quiet. A pile of cut turves, a wooden box carved with the shapes of birds. From the Bonefall Oracles. The maze garden behind the main hall was full of voices. The guests had left the table and bundled up against the cold to go outdoors. At least those seeking privacy they couldn't find inside the brightly lit halls. But how much privacy could there be, especially in full moonlight? It sounded like at least a dozen people were wandering through the maze, laughing and talking, women shushing the men, at least one fellow singing a bawdy old song about Daughtry elf-spelled, something that didn't seem quite appropriate with the twilight folk almost standing outside the gates. Winter was indeed crouching close this winter's eve, the air sharp and the wind picking up. Bryony wasn't cold, but she knew she should be. In fact, she could hardly feel her body at all. She went past the outskirts of the garden as quietly as she could, staying close to the hedge of ancient yew trees, drifting toward the stronghold like a floating spirit in a cloud of her own exhaled breath. She wanted nothing to do with any of the courtiers. It had been all she could do simply to look at them across the dining hall tonight. Now, with the memory of the inhuman thing that had killed Kendrick lodged in her mind like a jagged shard of ice, like the never-healing wound of the maiden in the song, she felt as though she would not be able to look at any of their empty faces again without screaming. She found her way in through a back door of the hall, but instead of making her way by the usual passages, crossed through one of the small chambers behind the throne room, avoiding the clutch of servants trying to finish up their chores in time for a Winter's Eve celebration of their own. No guards waited at the top of the stairs down into the stronghold, and when she pushed open the unbarred door at the bottom, she found only one man and his pike, sitting through a lonely watch. The guard was at least half asleep. He looked up slowly at the noise of the door, rubbing his eyes. She couldn't even imagine what she must look like in her tattered gown, her face, no doubt, as streaked with ash and blood as her hands. Princess? He scrambled up onto his feet, fumbling for the handle of his weapon, which he managed to lift with the wrong end up. It would have been comic, were it not all so miserable, the night so ghastly and full of blood and fire, and if his stupidly earnest face hadn't looked so much like Heron Millward's, the young guard now lying dead in a puddle of his own blood in Anissa's chamber. Where are the keys? Highness? The keys! The keys to Shazo's cell! Give them to me. But his eyes were wide. I truly must look like a demoness. Don't make me shout at you, fellow. Just give me the keys, then go and find your captain. Who is in charge with Vanson gone? The man fumbled the heavy key on its ring down from a peg on the wall. Tallow, he said after a moment's panicky thought. It's Jim Tallow, Highness. Then go get him. If he's asleep, wake him up, although I can't imagine why he would be asleep on Winter's Eve. But could it truly still be the same night? It had to be, but the thought was unmanageably strange. Tell him to bring soldiers and meet me here. Tell him the Princess Regent needs him, now. Until she knew why the witch maid Celia had done what she did, until she found whether the Southern girl had allies in the murder of Kendrick, no one must sleep. But by all the gods, now! The man dropped the keys in his alarm. Bryony cursed in a very unladylike way and bent and snatched them from the floor. The guard hesitated for only a moment, then threw open the door and scuttled up the stairs. The lock on the cell was stiff and hard to turn, but with both hands she managed to twist the key, and at last the door groaned open. The shape, huddled on the floor at the back of the cell, did not move, did not even look up. He's dead. Her heart, already so weary, sped again, and for a moment the darkness of the damp, cold room threatened to swallow her up. Shazo! Shazo, it's me, Bryony. The gods forgive us for what we've done. She ran to his side and tugged at him, relieved to hear the rasp of breath, horrified by how thin the old man had become. He began to stir. Bryony, we were wrong. Forgive us. Forgive me. Kendrick. She helped him sit upright. He smelled dreadful, and she couldn't help taking a step back. I know who killed Kendrick. He shook his head. It was dark in the cell, the single brazier outside not enough to illuminate even such a small space. She couldn't see his eyes. Kill? Shazo, I know you didn't do it. It was Celia, Anissa's maid. She's some kind of witch, a shape changer. She turned into oh, merciful Zoria, something. I saw it. Help me up. His voice was rough with disuse. For the love of all the gods, girl, help me up. She did her best, tugging on his arm as he struggled to get to his feet. She babbled out the night's story to him, not certain if he could even understand her in his sick and weary state. The chains clanked, and he slumped back down, defeated by their weight. Where are the keys for these? She asked. Shazo pointed. On that board on the wall. It was taking him a long time to say each word. I do not know which key fits these shackles. They have scarcely ever been taken off. Bryony's eyes filled with tears as she hurried to the board.
She could see no difference between any of the dozen rings, so she brought them all, weight that pulled her arms down straight at her sides as she hurried back to the cell. Why didn't you tell me? She began to fumble through the keys. She had to lean close as she tried each in the lock of his shackles. The old man's stench reminded her of the thing in Anis's chamber, but at least it was a more natural odor. You didn't do it, so why didn't you tell me? What happened between you and Kendrick? He was silent. First one, then the second of the shackles opened with a click of sprung iron. She could not help feeling the wet wounds they had made on his wrists as she helped him to stand. He was smeared up and down with blood, but then, so was she. Shazo wavered, then managed to stand erect. He held out his hands, struggling for balance. I did tell you that I did not kill your brother. I cannot speak of any more than that, he said at last. Bryony loosed a small shriek of frustration. What do you mean? I told you I know who murdered Kendrick. Don't you understand? Now you must tell me why you let us imprison you. It wasn't your fault. He shook his head wearily. My oath prevented me. It still prevents me. No, she said, I will not allow your stubbornness to. The door of the stronghold creaked open, and the guard she had dispatched appeared in the doorway. He wore a distracted expression, and his hands were pressed against his stomach as though he cradled something small and precious. He took a step into the chamber, then stumbled and fell onto his face. In her anger and confusion, it took Bryony a moment to realize that he was not getting up, another instant to notice the dark pool spreading beneath him. Your master of arms is still the perfect knight, isn't he? Hendon Tolley stepped out of the stairwell and into the room. He was dressed as though for a funeral, but smiling like a child who had just been given a sweet. A Zandian savage who would actually die to preserve his honor. 3 more men filed into the room behind him, all wearing the Tolley's livery, all with drawn swords. That is what makes my life easy, you know? All these fools willing to die for honor. I have found out who killed my brother, Bryony said, startled and frightened. I did not believe you had anything to do with it. Why have you killed this guard? And why do you come before me in this threatening way? She drew herself up to her full height. Did you have something to do with it? She didn't believe she could make Hendon Tolley hesitate about harming the reigning princess, but she might at least cause his minions to have second thoughts. Yes, you really might have made a queen in time, Tolley said. But you are green, girl child, green. You have come here without guards. You have left a trail of confusion and bloody deeds behind you all across the castle tonight. The story I will tell will explain it all, but not to your credit. Traitor, rumbled Shazo. He slumped back against the wall, his strength apparently at an end. It was you and your brother who caused all of this. Some of it, yes, Hendon Tolley laughed. And you, old man, like a drunkard wandering in front of a heavy coach, did not get out of my way. And now you will become the official murderer of the princess, as well as of Prince Kendrick. What are you babbling about? Bryony demanded, hoping that Tolley would speak long enough for her to think of something, or for someone to come and save her. Have you lost your mind? But no one would come. She knew that.
It was why he had stabbed the guard and let him die in front of her, as an illustration of her helplessness. The youngest Tolly was a cat who liked to sport with cornered prey, and this was a quality of sport he had been waiting for his entire life. And you know something? Even though it's very late, I'm going to stop there because I don't think I'm going to finish what's left tonight, and I'd like to leave a little bit, and maybe I'll back it up a little bit and read for the tomorrow night group, so as not to leave them without any story, because I don't have anything else right off the top of my head that I can read. So instead, I can let y'all go if you've got other things to do. If any of you want to ask any questions or anything, but yeah, I think I'm going to do that because I'd hate to just finish it and leave it there for the night. So anyway, but I'm sorry, I just was reading one of the comments here, trying to make sense out of it. And other people have showed up. Hello, Karen, and hello, Dirk. Good to see you. Anyway, so if anybody has a quick question they wanted to ask before I wrap it up for the night, otherwise I will say I don't know what I'm going to do next. Like I said, I want to save a little bit for tomorrow night because I haven't had a chance to think through what I'm going to do now that I'm just about finished with Shadowmarch. I'm not sure I want to plunge right into reading the second book because then I'm kind of committing myself for the next year because there's three more books altogether. Chris says, any plan to visit northern Germany? When we can travel again, I will almost certainly come back to Germany. And if I come to Germany, I usually go to quite a few places. So it depends on where in northern Germany. I mean, I've certainly been to Hamburg several times. I was in Bremen the last time I was there. I've been in other northern German places as well. And I certainly love traveling in Germany, so I never object when they give me longish trips because obviously I don't make it over that often, so they like to take advantage of it. So anyway, so when I can come back to Germany again, when travel is more settled, when we aren't still messing around with the pandemic, I will probably pretty likely come to northern Germany, I would think. The question is where, and obviously I can't even guess at this point. They do tend to be big cities and university towns. That tends to be where I mostly do my traveling. So I've been to a bazingle, a whole bunch of bazingle, whatever number that is, a bazingle of university towns. I've been to Freiburg and Heidelberg and Tübingen and where is it that I always go where they have the literary festival? Göttingen. So I've been to lots of places. Yeah, Lübeck. I'd love to come to Lübeck. So we'll see. And yes, Berlin. Petra, I usually come to Berlin. As far as your earlier question, Petra, about the next book of Shadowmarch, I don't know yet what I'm going to do. I may just start in a new book, or I might try and find something else to do instead. I don't know. I don't think I'm just going to disappear or stop reading or stop doing things online now that I've gotten into the habit of doing it and all of that stuff. So that's all I can tell you for certain, but I'm not just going to disappear. The thing with reading the second book of Shadowmarch is if I read the second book of Shadowmarch, then I'm really pretty much going to have to feel like I'll have to read the third and fourth book as well. And that is quite a commitment. Whereas if I'm going to read, the whole of something, it almost would make more sense to go back and read the Ostenard books, since that's what I'm working on at the moment. So anyway, don't know, can't say for certain, but I will keep you all informed. You will be the first to know. Well, the second to know after me, once I figure out what I'm doing and make some plans accordingly. Excuse me. Woo! God, how embarrassing. It's been a long weekend. But anyway, so don't know for certain, but definitely I'll be doing something. So if anybody else has any other questions about anything,
I'm happy to answer them. If not, I'm going to probably just wrap it up since I'll give it another couple minutes just to see if anybody else wanted to ask anything. I do still want to do a thing where instead of just reading, where I talk about some of my favorite things and introduce them to people who may not know them or share them with people who also love them. And that's, books and music and movies and art and stuff like that that have been particularly important or formative or just pleasing. But I know there's a lot of books, for instance, that I read when I was younger. I don't know how many people read them these days. I don't know how many people read E.R. Edison anymore, or William Morris's fantasy novels, or any number of things like that. I don't know how many people these days still read Roger Zelazny, who's had a lot of influence on me. Michael Moorcock, obviously, Fritz Leiber, people like that who were very influential. And there's a lot of movies that, again, I don't know how many of these things people get to see. The Tin Drum, one of my absolute favorites, based on the Günter Grass novel, and truly a disturbing and amazing movie. And so there's all kinds of things that I'd like to give little Tad Loves This things on, which would actually require, I wouldn't just probably be extemporizing. I'd probably do a little preparation for these things and stuff to share things with people. And almost every day I come across something and go like, God, does anybody know about this anymore? Or is this completely new? And of course, some of these things will be things that, especially for those of you in countries that, other than America and England, since a lot of you are in Germany and in the Netherlands and places like that, somebody in Japan. There are things I know, for instance, when I first started traveling in Germany and I would make references to Winnie the Pooh, and a lot of people didn't know it, whereas it's so formative for a lot of English-speaking children. It's, really common and things like that. So, and it was, I learned irony from Winnie the Pooh when I was a small child, and so there's things like that I would really enjoy sharing with people. And just say, hey, and obviously there would be a chance for people to say back to me, oh, do you know this? And that way I get new things as well, which I always enjoy, which is super fun to learn about new things that you haven't seen or whatever. And I know particularly. Although my German is not good enough probably to read in German, I know there are obviously I read Günter Grass, I didn't read it in the original German. And there's a lot of, books and films and stuff that, that come out of Germany that I would love to learn more about. Because as I mentioned the Tin Drum, Das Boot, Lola Rent, or Rent Lola Rent, whatever it's the actual German title of Run Lola Run. There's a lot of stuff like that that I would love to learn more about and have people say to me, oh, do you know this? And I'd say, no, I do not. Suzanne, actually, you might be surprised. Suzanne wrote, I suspect I'd be more familiar with Deb's reading and musical choices. Actually, you might be surprised because I was raised in an Anglophile family. So from the time I was very small, I was reading English children's books and grew up listening to English music and English comedy and all of this stuff. So in many ways, a lot of my childhood especially was much more formed by English things than American things, although obviously I am American. So you might be surprised by how many things we have in common. Anyway, but, Deborah has all kinds of great stuff too that she grew up with that I've picked up from her that I didn't know about, like the clangers, for instance, and other significant things. So anyway, Lola Rent. Yeah, that's okay. That was what I said first because that's how I remembered it. But anyway, wonderful movie, very fine movie with. God, I can't think of her name right now, but it's right on the tip of my tongue. Starts with an F. It's not Famke, because that's Famke Janssen, who is an X-Men I'm thinking of. It's, anyway, whatever. So all of these things and more are all running around in the empty, bat-haunted belfry that is my brain. And I will cogitate and probably ask some of you if you have any ideas or what you'd like. And one way or the other, I will continue doing stuff. So anyway, so that's basically where I'm at. And I'm going to come back tomorrow night for those of you who are roughly in similar time zones, and I will read the last bit tomorrow night rather than just kind of inform everybody then. Sorry, I read it all last night. We're done. But again, I apologize. But if worse comes to worse, you can always read the book. Go patronize your local libraries if you really want the ending. But otherwise, I'll be reading it tomorrow night, and then it'll be recorded. For those of you just tuning in for the first time, what are you doing? Don't you have anything better to do? If you don't, and if you're interested in catching up on some of this stuff, these are all recorded, and you can find them either on my social media, my Facebook pages, or on Twitter. You can also find them on tadwilliams.com, and Chris has actually been posting them on YouTube, so vielen Dank for that, Chris, and für das. And I will leave you with the Franca Potente. Thank you. Yeah, she's wonderful. She's even good in kind of dopey American movies like The Bourne Ultimatum or whatever it was. Anyway, Franca Potente. Yeah, she was great. So with that, I say thank you for joining me once again. Always a huge pleasure, and grand to see you all and to have you all check in. And hello, Felicity. I hadn't seen you before. You sleep well too when the time comes. I am fairly soon going to go to sleep, but until then, before then, I will just say thank you all again, and come back and join me. And take good care of yourselves, take good care of your loved ones and your friends and neighbors. And eventually, this will all be in our rearview mirror, and we can get back to our normal life of worrying about all the normal things that beset us in this modern age. So, thank you, peace, be good, and I will see you very soon.